It's my division round picks for DraftKings and FanDuel, and we're starting right now. What's up, guys? Welcome to another daily fantasy video. If this is your first time here and you want to become a profitable DFS player and get better at betting, start now by subscribing to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. And if you're already a Holkamaniac, you know exactly what time it is. Smash that like button and we'll get rolling. All right, so the division round playoffs, definitely if you haven't checked out the video when I walked through, there's a couple videos. The first video was just walking through my overall playoff DFS strategy. It is a lot different than other slates that you'll see throughout the year in terms of late swap, in terms of making moves as these slates slowly unfold. And if you want kind of a hands-on how I tend to do that sort of thing, just because we didn't profit overall on last week doesn't mean that the late swap show wasn't extremely valuable. So I actually have a video up on YouTube basically that replays that whole late swap stream, or at least the highlights from that stream. So go back and check that out if you're just seeing this for the first time. But definitely come hang out with us again this weekend. It's going to depend on if they're, as far as a morning stream, it's going to depend if I end up going to San Francisco to watch the 49ers Vikings game. Still trying to work out scheduling with all of that. Trying to get my DraftKings VIP to pony up for some tickets. If that doesn't happen, I don't know. We'll see. But in terms of this slate, guys, the order of this slate, talked about this a little bit last slate as well. It feels very similar, right? Like I think a lot of the chalk is going to be in game number 3, Houston and Kansas City. But a lot of the chalk last week was going to be that New Orleans game, right? Full transparency though, guys, the slates, these playoff slates that I love are the ones where all the chalk is in game 1 or 2, and you can grab pieces of it as we go. I'm going to continue to kind of talk about that because I think that is extremely important. An example of that last week would have been grabbing a couple Derrick Henry like shares along the way, right? So that if you have that game-breaking score, at least you have that piece. I'm not really someone that tends to game stack the first couple games just because I think that really limits you. If you get behind, you're basically dead. So I like to kind of save that for game 3 and number 4. Guys like John Brown, like grabbing a piece of John Brown as we go. You can do the same thing as value as well. So last week, for example, just grabbing a cheap wide receiver in game 1 or 2, hoping you choose the right one, yeah. But then you kind of late swap from there and really back into what some of the better games along the way as well. So I did add a column. Obviously, no ownership yet this time of the week. We'll have that for the subscribers as well. If anyone's just watching this on YouTube later, this is a data sheet that's available to all my Twitch subscribers in the Discord. So there are links in the description for all of that. Ownership will be filled in. But I added a ceiling column this week because I think this is something that, in terms of ownership, like this is what we want to look at, right? Like lower owned guys that will have a ceiling. That's the kind of pivots that I'm tending to make. So quarterback, let's just start at the top in terms of Lamar Jackson. We haven't had Lamar Jackson in what feels like a while on a main slate. He's 8,400 on DraftKings. He's 9,400 on FanDuel. This projection in terms of rushing yards, I have him at 57.2 rushing yards. Might honestly be even a little bit low. Tennessee moves on. I just wish Derrick Henry was gone. Maybe this will be the week we do it. We'll see. But I do think there's a chance that Baltimore comes out and kind of imposes their will here, guys. So 9 points. I was thinking this was going to be a double-digit spread. Maybe I'm wrong. I do think that Lamar Jackson in this spot, just Baltimore in general, could roll. So do you think that Lamar Jackson ends up playing an entire game at full speed? Maybe. It could also be a situation where it might even sound crazy. Maybe they've been holding him back slightly. Like Lamar might not be trying to get those extra few yards if it means taking a hit, right? Like it's the playoffs now. I don't know how much they're really going to scale him back in terms of stuff like that. So someone in the chat has been asking if naked Lamar is in consideration. Maybe. And I never say that at quarterback on these playoff slates because these type of slates in particular, I think it's really valuable to target situations that are very easily stackable and then trying to put the right pieces around it. Maybe Lamar is one of those right pieces. So I'm not completely ruling it out. I will say it's something that I barely ever do on these slates. So we'll talk about Hollywood Brown. We'll talk about Mark Andrews. I do think there's, it shapes up to be a slate where paying up a tight end would make sense. We have all these stud tight ends. We'll see. So Lamar, in terms of raw points, it's really hard to get away from that. In terms of ceiling, yeah. in terms of the best, like, I hate the phrase point per dollar, but I really like Patrick Mahomes this week. I like that he's in game number 3. In terms of ceiling, yes, that'll be there. This matchup against Houston, Houston's a team that's been above average in what they've allowed to running quarterbacks on the ground this year. The team total at home, I really like this spot for Kansas City, basically across the board. For some reason, I don't think that's going to be a contrarian take. I really don't. Talking about being easily stackable, there's a lot of very strong combinations you can make with Patrick Mahomes and figure out the rest from there. Like I said, similar to last week, it's nice that it's game number 3. At least you can kind of let things play out a little bit. So if you ended up in a spot where maybe the first couple of games don't go well for you, I still think there's some options we can pivot to in these last couple of games. So I do think Patrick Mahomes in this spot at that team total, I mean, across the board, we don't need to spend a ton of time on some of the real in-depth data this time of year. You guys know why Patrick Mahomes is one of my guys. He's someone that is has pretty clear weapons. He's not scared to throw deep. He will give us a little bit on the ground as well. So I'm in on Patrick Mahomes this week, even at that price tag. Definitely think that he's a guy that I'll have a ton of. So in terms of this 4th game, this is what makes me a little bit nervous. It shapes up a little bit like last week, honestly. So there's some spots that if it breaks right, maybe the Seattle and Green Bay game could have some points scored, but I don't know. I can't really picture a scenario where I'm just like trying to load up on game number 4 when we have all these points that should be scored in game number 3. So these are probably going to be pivot scenarios for me at this moment. So yeah, going back to the Russell Wilson, some of his pass catchers fine. These Green Bay games always just tend to be a little bit gross. I see this game just being a lot of running on both sides and just playoff style football that maybe isn't as fantasy friendly as some other spots. So I'm still trying to work through it a little bit. Noel, I know you're going to be all in on Tyreek. Love that. Picking Lamar and Mahomes with Tyreek, you could do that. Trying to load up on Sunday again, even if I don't felt. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Steve. I still think that if you're going to be loading up this, it's similar as last week. Honestly, I don't think there's a whole lot of differences to it. So in terms of the other guys that we do have available here, Ryan Tannehill's 5,400 on DraftKings, 7,800 on FanDuel. I mean, that's really cheap. I mean, they're making you make a decision in terms of these quarterbacks. So it's basically red across the board in terms of game environment, in terms of the matchup, in terms of the total, all of those things. What's not red is what Ryan Tannehill has been doing all year. This efficiency is just insane, right? We know that matters. I just have a hard time believing Tannehill is going to come in here in Baltimore and have a crazy different result than he had last week. I just don't know if this is a spot where I really want to go there. I think ideally what they want to do is just run Derrick Henry and run him some more. And then when 4 guys bounce off him, they're just going to feed him the ball again, and they're going to give it to him again and again. So at that point, like, maybe this whole Derrick Henry doesn't catch passes thing, like, really doesn't matter. So we'll see. This price tag's interesting. I would imagine I'll have like basically 0. Like if I end up playing about 6 to 7 teams like I did last week, I think I ended up having some smaller dollar teams, which we went over in terms of late swap, obviously. But my main higher stakes small field teams, I'd be shocked if I end up with any Tannehill. In terms of the other side of these beginning, so let's talk about the first game. Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo, also very cheap. Also 2 teams that ideally want to run. Drastically low total for Minnesota. Kirk Cousins, I ended up on some Kirk Cousins last week in terms of late swaps. This week, this seems like a game that's going to be really tough to have exposure to here in game number 1. Seems like a prime letdown spot for this Minnesota team. I think San Francisco is pretty much the clear favorite, but honestly, the NFC seems way more wide open than the AFC does to me. So in terms of like New Orleans, honestly, I thought was the biggest threat for Baltimore. So that's what's crazy to think about that. But so I think if Minnesota gets there, it's probably going to have a lot to do with Dalvin Cook and then just kind of grinding this game out, kind of similar to how they beat New Orleans. I just don't know if there's a ton of fantasy friendliness to this game. Maybe Jimmy G at this price tag would have some intrigue on DraftKings. I just hate burning my quarterback slot in the first game. And you guys, I mean, it's a broken record at this point. It's not that I think that these guys are drastically work plays, but you have to realize in the context of these playoff slates, burning that slot early is never good. And sure, the people that played Josh Allen last week might disagree. Okay, fine. That also happened to be a slate where no one really got there. All 4 games went under, right? Pretty clearly, the better offenses were later in the slate, just like this one. So I think that I'll be light on all 3 of these guys. Cousins, Garoppolo, Tannehill. I'm not really super interested in them on main teams right now. Deshaun Watson, I am a little bit intrigued by that because I do think that there's a chance that even if they kind of start out slow, that this game could end up going back and forth enough to where if we like these weapons for KC, like pretty clear bringbacks, especially if we get Will Fuller back for Deshaun Watson, this might be the price tag that stands out a decent amount. Another team, KC, is someone that will give up a decent amount of production to running quarterback. So I'd have some interest in that. Aaron Rodgers most likely will be pivot only for me. I do think that it's a reasonable game environment here in terms of where the plays are shaping up right now. I just don't have a lot of, I guess, this Aaron Rodgers thing just hasn't really worked out for us a ton this year in terms of him actually trying to force balls into tight windows in terms of having that ceiling. So sure, that maybe some Aaron Rodgers to Devontae Adams stacks are in play here, especially in game 4. Like I'd be shocked if I ended up with 0. But I don't know if it'll be one that I start there, if that makes sense. Someone was saying that the pricing is really good at quarterback this week. I kind of like it as well. It makes you like, I mean, you have to make those decisions for sure. Yeah, San Francisco is the second game or the first game, Steve. Second game, Baltimore, Tennessee. Gavin's all over it in the chat. Why is San Francisco in an early game, Baltimore in a night game? Not sure, man. That's just the order. I originally thought that Minnesota would be the next day because they had the least amount of rest of anyone, right? Which is weird. 49ers took Baltimore wire to wire, lost by a field goal. Doesn't have the points in a solo game. Yeah, so this is the thing. So Jimmy G at that price is viable, Eric says. Third highest team total if he gets 2 or 3 TDs. So I think that, I mean, sure, Garoppolo, there's some weapons you can pair that, but like they have like 3 running backs that are going to give the ball, right? So we'll get to that position. But I think that's pretty much it for me at quarterback, guys. I think as we progress through these other positions, things will be a little bit more clear. Before we go any further, I'm always trying to find unique and creative ways to give back to the community and at the same time try and get you guys involved in what we're trying to build here. So if I hit 10K followers on Instagram before the Super Bowl, I will be free rolling one lucky member of the Holkamania community 150 lineups for the Super Bowl showdown slate. I do think this is something that we can definitely accomplish as a community. It was one of my goals for the NFL season, and it is something that you can enter this drawing multiple times by really helping out across my platform. So a couple of things that you can do: retweet anything from me when I'm talking about this contest on Twitter at Joe Holka. You'll get an entry. Retweet anything from me that links to my YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You will get an entry. If on that original tweet, you do reply with your DK username. So retweeting is one thing. I'm going to need your username to tally all of this up. Another great way to kind of get involved and get more entries into this drawing is to comment like on a new YouTube video, Instagram post, or LinkedIn cheat sheet. This is all going to be within 24 hours. So if you see one of my videos go up, again, hit that notification bell so you know when all my videos go up. All you have to do is post your DK username in the comments. Dalvin, I do have him projected for the most touches on the slate. It's basically by default because you have to basically give Derrick Henry not many touches through the air. I did actually add a little bit to Derrick Henry's projection since he was, I guess, used on that one kind of wheel route last week, 20-yard run or something like that through the air. So I added a little bit to this projection just so he wasn't at basically a 0 like he normally is at. Still had Dalvin coming out ahead in terms of touches. Both have really low team totals. Both are pretty heavily underdog teams. So, yeah, I think both of these guys, game 1, game 2, I think this is probably a grab some along the way. Hope you hit on a couple. I don't know if I'll have a crazy overweight position on either of these guys. The matchup couldn't be much worse for Dalvin in terms of running backs and the matchup through the air. They were the best team at defending running backs in the passing game this year in terms of San Francisco. So I do think that while even if Minnesota gets down, they're still going to kind of establish the run a little bit in terms of what this team wants to do. But these price tags are tough, right? Dalvin Cook, guy that catches passes in a bad spot, but a team that wants to run. Derrick Henry. I mean, if this could be low easily if he ends up touching the ball 28 times, something like that, and almost all of them are on the ground. Might just be an inefficient spot. I don't know. I think Baltimore is a little bit nastier than the Patriots. I could be wrong though. KCD can be leaky. Sure, they've gotten hot. What else am I missing here in the chat? Breeze was chalk last week against the same Minnesota defense. Jimmy G could be a good play. I'm with you, Steven. I'm not ruling out Jimmy G, but I guess I was on like Breeze against Minnesota. Still, it's game 3. It's like having the Breeze hammers in game 3 in theory would have made sense. I'm still really not sure why New Orleans didn't get there. And like how poorly they played, I should say, against this defense. Do we think Deshaun will have plus or minus 10% ownership? I mean, I still think that he'll still be up there. I think he'll be the 3rd highest. I'll say that. Raz is talking about Williams. Yeah, Damian Williams seems like the clear guy to me in terms of the running back position that we'll be targeting. So this price just seems really low to me for a guy with that team total at home. One of the better matchups, like Houston, 27th at defending running backs in the passing game, 22nd in terms of DVOA. Over 20 touches, checks a lot of boxes for me, guys. I think that his ceiling is comparable to these guys at the top, and he's severely cheaper. So yeah, I'm in on Damian. I think that Damian shapes up as like one of the guys that I'll have the most of this week for sure. I think he's going to be the massive chalk. But to me, that's pretty much good chalk. Williams at 21 touches for 6K. Yeah, I just don't think they're going to use McCoy a ton. They've kind of showed that they were willing to kind of rest Damian a little bit in that Week 17 game. So I'm in on Damian at 6K. My guy Aaron Jones going to break this slate. Like these guys hanging around like Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry that have just been costing me money all year being on this slate is not good. Maybe I'll finally get even on Derrick Henry and Aaron Jones. We'll see. One last thing, Jimmy G. We like to wait for game 3-4. Can we be sharp to play low-owned guys in game 1 if they go off? You're sitting pretty. Yeah, so that's a way to attack it as well, man. So we always talk about maybe playing, like I like having early slate chalk because then if the chalk fails, you can move. If the chalk doesn't fail, you're in a good spot moving along the way. You can use it the other way as well if you wanted to take some shots like one-off players, low-owned one-off players. And actually this could have worked out on FanDuel last week in game number 2 where guys like Harry were very under-owned on draft on FanDuel. And if you hit that game at low ownership early, sure, you can move to more chalk as the slate kind of progresses, and maybe that's how you should play these type of slates where a lot of the chalk is going to be in game 3 or 4. So I like that comment, Eric. I think that's really sharp. Ingram somehow ends up not playing. Gus is going to get all the ownership. Is there an injury for Mark Ingram? What do we got here? That'd be the first I heard about that. Let's see. Because I had to kind of piece my way through this whole Mark Ingram thing. Anyway, he's day-to-day with a calf injury. So, I mean, we know nothing. Apparently, the Ravens just haven't really said much about it. So, we'll see. Hasn't practiced, sure. So, Ingram, yeah, I mean, at that price, like he would have probably made a reasonable pivot off of Damian, but I just can't really see a universe where I would be burning this number 2 game slot when I had Damian coming in game number 3. But in terms of pricing, like there's going to be certain builds that'll probably lead you towards playing 2 of these guys. But it seems relatively easy to me to just try and split shares between the Dalvin and Derrick Henrys at the top and then really just kind of build my teams around Aaron Jones, Damian Williams. If there was a guy that was a little bit cheaper that I would go to, I actually have a little bit of interest in Travis Homer since he kind of failed last week. I guess always the issue there is Marshawn's going to come in and take the touchdowns. They have said that Marshawn could be a little bit more involved this week. So I don't know. He's 5,100. He's not free. And Green Bay actually is a team that's pretty decent against running backs in the passing game. But more or less the game theory behind it of Homer kind of burned a lot of people last week. I don't think many people are going to go back there. Chubb balled on Ravens first time they played the Browns. Henry should have a chance. Oh, I mean, the volume should be there, right? I mean, in terms of like guys that have a locked in workload, I mean, they just beat the Patriots doing one thing. I would imagine they're not going to go away from that. I think Derrick Henry's fine. I'll definitely have some. I will not have 0. That's for sure. Williams has been practicing per road ruled. Okay, good to know. Even if he is, right, I still think that Aaron Jones, in the context of this slate, ends up being a reasonable guy to wait on in Game 4. So, should we talk about these San Francisco guys? I just don't have a lot of interest overall. Am I wrong there? So, Mostert 5,800. He gets scores every game. Okay. Now they're basically healthy across the board, I believe. So, this projection might even be a little bit high. I don't know if he's going to be used much in the passing game. I just have a hard time burning this game number 1 running back. I just have no idea what's going to happen with these San Francisco running backs. Tevin Coleman, 7.22 touches. I don't know. Matt Breida, I guess, stealing a little bit through the air, another 6 or 7 touches, something like that. It seems like a stay away to me. I don't know. I would much rather take a home run shot on Travis Homer than mess around with these San Francisco running backs. At least that's how I feel on first glance. Maybe maybe using it as like a Mostert type of thing early in the slate. If it fails, great, you make moves. If it doesn't fail, fine. He was 5,800, helps you kind of move throughout the slate with a decent value. I guess I don't know. I'm not really in on that. If Mostert's going to be super chalky, that's going to be a reasonable fade, I think, in tournaments for sure. Steve in the chat looks like he's fading this backfield entirely. At least that's how he's leaning right now. So that's kind of where I'm at too, man. Anything else at running back, guys? I think we talked through most of it. Damian, far and away, the best price play. I don't think it's especially close. Wide receiver, we do have Devontae Adams back on the slate. In terms of weighted opportunity, we know A.J. Brown's going to be way up there. Tough sell against Baltimore, especially for a team that's going to run as much as they have been. We saw the floor finally last week. A.J. Brown could be a guy that just ends up burying us in terms of his efficiency off the charts. We don't need to talk about his yards per route run again. It's elite. We know that. In terms of weighted opportunity, Devontae Adams at 7,800 is someone I could certainly see leaving some shares open for. I think that you can say what you want about this Green Bay offense. They want to run. We get all of that. They're not really like a high event offense, but Devontae Adams is going to be involved. Aaron Rodgers trusts him. I don't think you really need a whole lot more outside of that. So Devontae Adams versus DeAndre Hopkins is an interesting, I think, discussion to have, because I think a lot of people are probably going to wait and play Devontae. In terms of game environment, though, we might end up seeing a spot, especially if Fuller ends up not playing, could be a DeAndre Hopkins at least making a decent bring back option on Mahomes stacks for sure. So I'd be in on that. I still think that I prefer Tyreek to both of these guys. This massive total, I really don't think there's going to be someone on the Houston side of the ball that can stop Tyreek Hill. He's been getting a lot of his usage kind of in the slot. Houston, that's where you attack them. 30th in the league at defending the short area of the pass. If they're just going to get the ball into Tyreek's hands, I want all the Tyreek Hill this week, all of it. So I think at 7,600, he's still someone, the way he's being used, I would be extremely comfortable with in this game environment. In game number 3, checks a lot of boxes for me, guys. Lockett leverage. He seems like he's always the leverage guy, right? Just because he's volatile in terms of they need this game to be a shootout for him to completely go nuts, most likely. Now Metcalf has kind of shown us what he can do as well. I don't have a ton of interest in Tyler Lockett, if I'm being honest. As a prime leverage play, yeah, he's got to be near the top. Lockett, Diggs, those would be the guys in terms of leverage that I think that I would be going to. I just don't know if, obviously Diggs is in game 1. That's a really tough stand to take against this defense. But I do think that he could be a low-owned piece that you could throw out on an MME team. And if you catch fire, maybe you're way ahead, something like that. Lockett at least has the upside of being in game 4. So I'd be in on that in terms of a late swap only. Someone was asking about Manny Sanders. Let's take a look. 5,400. We're at home, obviously. It's game 1. Ceiling's reasonable. His weighted opportunity better than Debo's for sure. The thing about Debo is he's just going to be he's going to be the efficiency guy for sure in terms of his Total yards over the last 4 games per game. Debo's at 85 total yards per game. That's a pretty nice number, 5,200. So I actually think that Debo would be the guy that I would be more likely to take a shot on because I think his ceiling's a little bit higher. Yeah, Diggs' price is extremely low on DK, Steve. This is the first week Lockett is less on DK. It could be. It seems like a lower price tag for Lockett as well. 6,600 seems like lower than he has been. Yeah, and Metcalf is 200 more. Manny on FanDuel. Okay, let's see what Manny was at on FanDuel here. 5,700. That could be a piece to grab along the way, my friends. Whoever mentioned that in the chat, I think that's pretty sharp. Yeah, Manny Sanders versus Sammy Watkins later is what you're asking yourself, right? So Sammy Watkins on FanDuel, 5,200. On DraftKings, Sammy Watkins is 4,300. It sounds like I'm just going to have a bunch of KC onslaught teams. Is that pretty much what everyone's been building so far? Sammy Watkins tilt at that price. I mean, it's a tough price tag to get away from this high total game, man. As like a guy that you can add into your stacks. I don't know. I think it's a really good price for a guy in game 3 that's going to see volume in a high total. Especially, I mean, on both sides, really. I have some interest there. Hardman greater than Watkins. That's a little bit of a hot take, but I don't hate it. Hardman, let's look at the data a little bit. So Hardman, 4,100. His weighted opportunity is really bad. His yards per route run is reasonable. Everything else is, in terms of volume, it's a very high efficiency play that you're making there. But I do like his yards per route run. I'll give you that. In terms of wide receiver, I don't know. I think I'm still trying to get to Sammy Watkins on that side of the ball. Tyreek versus Devontae at the top, I think, is somewhat splitting hairs. But I mean, like I said, I think I'm leaning Tyreek and these KC guys right now. Debo would be the San Francisco guy I'd be taking a shot on early. What do we think about Marquis Brown with Lamar? So Marquis Brown is someone we were definitely playing a ton of earlier in the season. 4,400. I mean, I like the price tag for sure. I guess my concern would be there's just so much running in this game that plays overall really suffer. But in terms of the deep pass, Tennessee can be beat deep. I don't know. I have a little bit of interest in Marquise Brown if I'm going to have some Lamar teams, which I will. It's a great price, Steve. You're all over it, man. It's a great price. I think that for the ceiling, like, look at this. Yeah, exactly. I don't know who mentioned this, but that's a great thing to look at. Let's use this ceiling thing that I took time to put in here today. Debo's got a really nice ceiling for his price tag on DraftKings for sure. In terms of Marquise Brown, that's a really nice price tag for a guy that has a ceiling of like around 20 points. I like it. Yeah, so Marquise Brown versus Sammy Watkins. Where do we land on that one, chat? 30% on an RG pairing him is too easy. That's true. Andrews. Andrews is 5,600 on DraftKings, Steve. 68 on FanDuel. Yeah, Hollywood could end up being the child. He's just going to end up on a lot of Lamar teams, for sure. I'm with you. I still think at that range, like, is anyone going to wait around for Allen Lazard? I know someone mentioned him earlier as we were kind of making our way through here. Lazard, I mean, last 2 games, 8 targets, 9 targets. Like, the ceiling hasn't been fantastic, but he did score last week. I don't know. He could be a reasonable pivot off of some of these guys. Like, in terms of leverage guys that I think we're going to be looking into later in the slate, like I said, whoever said Lockett, I think that's interesting. Demarcus Robinson, if we really want to go completely off the board, KC, I think he's in play. Kenny Stills, depending on what we have with Fuller. Even if Fuller comes back, like some of the games we've seen Kenny Stills do well in, Fuller was in this year. So he's 4,800, still a reasonable ceiling at not much ownership, I think. I think those would be the guys we're looking to in terms of wide receiver to make moves. Let's see what else we $1,500 discount from Andrews, comparable ceiling. Yep, for sure. So let's move on to tight end. That's a good transition. Tight end. We got a stud tight end slate, ladies and gentlemen. So all 3 of them there are at home. All 3 have reasonable totals. All 3 have weighted opportunity ratings like wide receivers. In terms of their yards per route run, all three are seeing deep routes. Like this is the upside scenario for these type of guys, right? So I think that like those three guys, I think that, I mean, just in general, Mark Andrews is a little bit cheaper. Pairing him with Lamar, like there's going to be some interest there for a lot of people. Tennessee 20th against tight ends. I think that I still pretty strongly prefer Kelsey in the spot. I guess shocker. I guess like the KC guy again. But I could see myself just having a bunch of different types of KC stacks. I think that George Kittle is someone that, like, talking about these one-off plays, having some George Kittle in the first game, just hoping that we have that ceiling performance. If we don't, we just make moves. It's really not that big a deal. You just have to progress that team differently throughout the slate. Someone says, are you referring to Fursker as one of the stud tight ends? I'm not. But Fursker, so in terms of value, let's just start there. I don't know. So Fursker's 2,500. He's in like that Irv Smith range of being like almost stone min. Seems like just chasing those 3 targets and a touchdown last week might be bad. That's how I feel about it. Routes run. It's just not running a lot of routes, guys. I don't know. Fursker's probably not for me. Jordan Aikens, 3K. Is he going to be healthy? Do we know that yet? Double tight end is in play. Maybe. Using something, yeah, Bird, that's sharp, man. Like using Kelsey as a flex, something like that. I can see it. Yeah, just playing Kittle, hoping that he goes off. It doesn't mean you can't play Kelsey after that. Just using him as a wide receiver. These are slates where I'm more open to like not playing the running back in the flex, right? Because if you're looking for ceiling, if you're looking for different types of roster construction, I'd be in on that, playing more larger field stuff. Make sure he warns us about plays like that before he DK Frisker. Yeah, I'm with you on that, Gavin. In terms of ceiling, though, it seems pretty clearly these top 3, right? Probably the top 2 in terms of massive ceiling. Again, if anyone's watching this on YouTube later, we'll have this ownership in here. I like to kind of aggregate that in a couple of sources, and then we'll have that in the Discord. So Hollister at 4K, do we have interest in that in game 4? I do. I think Hollister is really interesting at that price, especially because I think a lot of people are going to be paying up. Only got 4 targets last week, but the 2 weeks before, 8 and 6. Hasn't really shown much of a ceiling in terms of yardage, but he's got 4 red zone targets in the last 2 games. So if you're looking for a guy that could just get you a touchdown at the cheaper range, like Hollister is not stone min or anything like that. But I think he would be the value guy that I'd be looking to. Maybe Jonnu, something like that, 3,400. Taking a shot on Jonnu in one of the first games seems like a great way to put your team behind, but it could work out. In terms of ceiling, I still think that I prefer Hollister relative to some of these other dart throws down here. If we get Fells again, maybe. Casey's been one of the better teams in the league against the tight end, though, 4th best. So in terms of matchup, that would be somewhat of a concern. Minnesota, number 1 DVOA against tight ends. Probably doesn't matter for guys like Kittle, though. Not really that worried about it. They did price up these tight ends. Yeah, you have to sacrifice a lot to play these guys. On FanDuel, too, man. Look how expensive these guys are on FanDuel. So Seahawks are garbage versus the tight end. Jimmy G is real cheap. Let's look at some cheap guys. Let's do it. Jimmy G, 3,300. Game 4. Seattle, at home. Nice total. He's running routes. Good matchup. I don't know how big the ceiling is for a guy like Jimmy G at this point. You should probably stop calling him Jimmy G. Jimmy Graham. The real Jimmy G is playing in game 1. So the ceiling's not great here. This yards per route run, we know that. But could he have value at 3,300? I could see it. Is there a dustier player in the league than Jimmy Graham? Probably not, man. DK begging us to play Hollywood. Yeah, so like that price differential on Hollywood versus Mark Andrews makes me want to have a lot of Mark Andrews. At least in tournaments, but it's an interesting spot, guys. It's really a tight end is like one of the more fascinating positions, I think, on this slate. We ready to move on to defense, or do we have a couple other here? CK Tannic, thanks for your Twitch Prime, man. Appreciate that. Yeah, I always want to remind you guys too, if you have that Amazon Prime account, make sure you're taking advantage of that free Twitch Prime subscription. Just one of the best ways to support what I'm doing here for free. Revenge narrative for Graham. I guess I didn't think about that. All the revenge narratives in playoffs. Andrews goes above owned what he should be based. Yeah, that's true. I mean, you're going to be like, people just want to stack Lamar, right? So I'm with you on that, Gavin. Let's talk about defense. So defense for me, it's pretty clear. And last week it was too, and I got burned by Tennessee, which wasn't great. There wasn't like a massive ceiling game I didn't see really from defense last week anyways. But in terms of just targeting poor offensive lines, Seattle, Houston, Minnesota, just so happens those are the teams that will be facing defenses that are at home, that are favorites, that also pressure, right? So Green Bay at 2,800 in game 4, sign me up for that. Russell Wilson will take sacks. We know that. Doesn't throw a lot of picks or anything like that, but I think the pressure is going to be there all game. So I'm interested in Green Bay at that price for sure. I have a lot of interest in Green Bay. In terms of past that, if we want to pay up a little bit more for someone like KC, play the other side of what happens in this game. Like how do the KC weapons, Mahomes, all those guys, how do they fail? Maybe it's because the defense gets 2 touchdowns. Deshaun Watson, targeting him all year, guys. Take sacks, all of that. Like, yeah, it didn't work out last week, but I still think the process is fine there. A team that's been pressuring more over the last 4 than over the season. I'd be in on some KC shares at home. I think it's interesting. San Francisco in game 1, this would be one that I would have a little bit more issue with, but like, does anyone see like that Cousins could just implode at any moment? Maybe. Does he completely get a pass because he finally won that big game? I don't know. Doesn't throw a lot of picks, but he takes sacks, and it's a very poor offensive line. The concern, I guess, would just be the overall game environment, and then it's game number 1. So I think San Francisco would be a pretty distant third option versus Green Bay and KC for me. I love that both these are in like the last 2 games as well. So I'd be in on that. Baltimore would be the other one that I'd be considering against Tannehill. The issue with targeting Tannehill isn't that he takes sacks. It isn't any of those things. It's that they might just run the ball with Derrick Henry most of the game. But I do think that Baltimore is a team that'll pressure. Again, another team that's pressuring more lately. Tannehill will take sacks. I like Baltimore a lot. I think, they're expensive, right? So it's harder to get there on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it's a little bit easier to make that work. But I do think in terms of ceiling, Baltimore is right there with Green Bay and KC. I think Green Bay and KC look to be a little bit more optimal. I rarely play Seattle defense. Definitely not playing them against Aaron Rodgers. Didn't play Tennessee last week. Like, these pressure numbers, I avoid these teams. These are the teams that I just like don't play ever. And I'm certainly not playing them against Lamar Jackson and Aaron Rodgers. Seattle would be completely dead, pivoting, like trying to scratch and crawl, kind of my way back into relevance at no ownership, but that'd be it for me. Minnesota defense against San Francisco, not super interested in that either. So I think that's pretty much it for me, guys. I guess there'd be an argument for playing the 2K defense in a decent game environment. I don't know if I love it, but I guess at the price, yeah, I could see maybe a Houston team in terms of DraftKings, just price play only, getting you to some of these other plays, getting you to some of these tight ends. San Francisco defense is getting healthier. That's a good point. If you want to learn more about how to be a profitable DFS player and how to get better at betting, start now by hitting the subscribe icon in the bottom right-hand corner so you don't miss anything. Make sure you check out all the other great educational courses that I do have right here on YouTube, and we'll see you guys next time.